The boardroom was supposed to be silent, supposed to echo only with the shuffle of papers and the low hum of air vents. But silence shattered the moment a voice cut through it like broken glass. "You don't belong here." The words didn't drift. They detonated. Charles Whitman, 58, in a tan suit and lime shirt that clashed like warning signs, was on his feet. His fist slammed the polished oak table, his other hand stabbing the air toward the only man still standing calm. His voice reverberated against the glass walls until even the two security officers by the door straightened, unsure if this was still a meeting or already a scene. Across from him, Darius Cole didn't flinch. His suit, a bold electric blue, didn't belong to the quiet palette of the room either. Neither did the canary yellow shirt or the deep violet tie. But his stillness made the colors sharper, more deliberate, like a flag planted in hostile territory. His hands rested together, knuckles tight but unmoving. "You walked in here as if you earned this seat," Whitman snarled, his gray hair slicked back so hard it looked like armor. "But men like you buy access, they don't build it. And we're not going to let you take this company down with your schemes." Murmurs traveled around the table. A woman in green shifted uneasily, her pen tapping against her notepad like a nervous metronome. Beside her, a man in orange leaned back too far, as if distance could protect him from the crossfire. At the far end, the vice chair in purple folded his hands with studied indifference, but his jaw betrayed the tension tight, clenched, unwilling to intervene. And then Whitman's finger pressed closer, so near it trembled inches from Darius's chest. "Security! If he doesn't sit down, escort him out. Now." The officers didn't move. Their eyes flicked between the raging executive and the man in blue, as if they knew instinctively that stepping forward too soon could change more than one career. Darius inhaled once, deep, steady. His gaze swept the table, not hurried, not defensive, just deliberate. He had been here before, in different rooms, with different faces, always the same tone, always the same accusation dressed up as policy. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Darius. He tilted his head slightly, almost curious, like a man watching a storm form rather than bracing against it. The fluorescent lights caught the sharp line of his jaw, but his voice, when it finally came, wasn't raised. "Is this how you measure worth?" he asked, quiet enough that the room had to lean in. "By volume?" The question landed heavier than the shout before it. For a beat, no one spoke. The tension didn't break, it condensed. Whitman's face reddened further. His tie shifted as his chest heaved, his authority unraveling thread by thread. And yet, somehow, the man he wanted erased only grew larger in the silence. 2 hours earlier, that same boardroom hadn't yet turned into an arena. It was just another Monday morning, a calendar filled with quarterly reports, projections, and contracts to be signed. The kind of morning where people measured power by how fast their assistants poured coffee. Darius Cole entered without any of that theater. No entourage, no assistant carrying binders, no nameplate waiting at his seat. Just him tall, composed, carrying a slim leather folio tucked under one arm. He could have been mistaken for a consultant, a last-minute hire brought in to pitch an idea no one would listen to. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He paused at the glass door. The receptionist glanced up, eyes darting from his brightly cut suit to the badge clipped at his side. For a second she hesitated, as if the colors were louder than the name. But the badge was clean, access granted. He took his place at the table without announcement. The others were already there, settling in with rustles of paper and the metallic clink of pens. Whitman had leaned across to the vice chair in purple, muttering something that ended in a smirk. The woman in green adjusted her lapel pin. The man in orange was already scrolling through his phone, half present. No one greeted Darius. No one offered a handshake. It wasn't just the colors of his suit that drew suspicion, it was the absence of pedigree in their eyes. No one remembered him from their circles of private clubs or inherited seats. To them, he wasn't part of the lineage that passed boardrooms down like family heirloom. That didn't bother him. He had built companies from warehouses, not mahogany tables. He had signed contracts on the hoods of cars, not in conference halls. He had been denied loans, denied entry, denied acknowledgement, long before he could afford a suit like this. The weight of those rejections wasn't a burden, it was armor, and now it gleamed electric blue under fluorescent light. A junior board analyst, barely 30, sat near the corner with a laptop open. His eyes flicked toward Darius once, curious. He'd read something in an article, maybe a profile, but the pieces didn't fit yet. He stayed quiet, the way junior staff do when the air feels too sharp to breathe. Darius laid his folio flat on the table, not opening it. He didn't need charts and graphs to prove himself today. The test was never about numbers. It was about patience, about whether he could endure, again, the moment when a man like Whitman would decide loudly, confidently that he didn't belong. And right on cue, it happened. The meeting began with slides projected onto the wall. Revenue, projections, strategies, routine. But as soon as Darius's proposal was introduced, an initiative to redirect company funds toward community reinvestment, Whitman's jaw clenched. His fingers tapped against his watch, the metallic click like a countdown. The question wasn't if he would object. The question was how long it would take before the mask slipped and the insult became public. It didn't take long. The projector hummed, its glow spilling charts across the wall. Numbers swam in clean columns, growth, margin, reinvestment. But the silence in the room wasn't about numbers. It was about the man delivering them. Whitman leaned back in his chair now, lips curled. Community reinvestment? He repeated, his tone dripping like acid. This board exists to maximize shareholder value, not to play charity worker. A few chuckles circled the table. The man in orange coughed into his fist, half laugh, half dismissal. The woman in green raised a penciled brow, her pen still tapping like a metronome, keeping time with Whitman's contempt. Darius didn't look at them. He kept his eyes forward, calm, steady, like a man who had already calculated their moves before they made them. The vice chair in purple finally spoke, his voice measured but sharp. Mr. Cole, your background hardly qualifies you to dictate fiscal policy. You've yet to prove you even understand the scale of what we manage here. A murmur rippled through the room, agreement disguised as professionalism. One board member whispered to another, too low to be caught, but their smirk gave it away. And then came the jab that tipped the air heavier. This isn't a neighborhood barber shop, the man in orange said, his phone still in hand, eyes gleaming with casual cruelty. We don't hand out seats because someone dresses loud and talks big. The words landed like a slap, echoing louder than the slide transitions. Even the security officers shifted their stance at the door, discomfort tracing across their otherwise blank expressions. Whitman seized the moment, gesturing toward them with a sweep of his hand. Frankly, gentlemen, I think we're done here. If he insists on wasting our time, feel free to escort him out. We have a business to run. Neither officer moved. Their eyes stayed fixed on Darius, waiting, measuring. Around the table, small signals betrayed the uneasy knuckles whitening on pens, shoulders stiffening under tailored jackets, eyes flicking toward the glass wall where a junior analyst sat half-hidden. The analyst's hand hovered near his laptop, cursor blinking on an empty document. He knew this wasn't just another disagreement, it was crossing a line. His thumb brushed against his phone under the table, instinct tugging at him to record, to capture proof before the moment slipped. But he hesitated, caught between silence and conscience. Darius remained unmoved. He hadn't raised his voice once. His hands still rested on the folio, fingertips pressed together, the very image of patience under fire. But the room was restless now, swollen with tension. The green-suited woman finally spoke, her tone clipped. If you can't provide evidence of your capacity, Mr. Cole, perhaps it's best you excuse yourself. We cannot indulge experiments. Experiments, Whitman repeated with relish, like the word itself was a verdict. He slammed the table once more, rattling water glasses. That's all, this is an experiment gone too far. And with every insult, with every dismissive glance, the trap wound tighter. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Darius hadn't come to prove his place. He had come to measure theirs. The room bristled with voices, but none of them came from Darius. Whitman's laughter was jagged, cutting across the oak table. See? Nothing to say. That's what I thought. Empty suit, empty ideas. His finger drummed against his watch as if to remind everyone their time was being wasted. The woman in green leaned forward. Mr. Cole, silence isn't strategy. It's concession. But Darius didn't flinch. He simply breathed slow, deliberate. His eyes didn't dart around the table like prey. They anchored, steady and unyielding, on the people who were trying to strip him bare. And in that stillness, Memory surfaced. He was 24, standing outside a bank in Detroit. A loan officer had closed the blinds after telling him his file was too risky. Behind the glass, he saw 3 men in suits approving a smaller loan for someone who hadn't brought half the collateral. He remembered the way his palms had burned, clenched against a briefcase filled with paperwork no one bothered to read. At 31, it was an industry dinner. He wore his only tailored suit, then navy, nothing flashy. The host looked past him when assigning seats, placing him at the farthest table, away from the investors, next to the catering staff on break. He'd stayed the whole evening, silent, absorbing the conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. And now, at 42, he was here again. Same dismissal, different room, same verdict, you don't belong, dressed in corporate language and polished contempt. But his silence was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of a man cataloging every word, every gesture, every crack in the facade of authority. The junior analyst at the corner looked up from his screen. His eyes flicked between the furious faces and the man in blue who refused to move, refused to bend. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, "Why isn't he fighting back?" Because Darius understood what they didn't. In a room where everyone rushed to dominate the air, silence was its own gravity. The longer he withheld his words, the heavier theirs became. Whitman mistook it for weakness. He pushed harder, his voice growing louder, chest rising with every insult. "Do you hear me? You don't have the pedigree, the education, the legacy. You're a blip, a placeholder, and this board will never, ever take orders from you." The vice chair adjusted his cufflinks, trying to mask his agreement as neutrality. But even he glanced at the security officers, testing whether they would obey Whitman's command. Still, Darius sat unmoved. Silence thickened, stretching across the table like smoke. Even the projector's hum felt louder, the only mechanical witness to the unraveling order. Water in the glasses trembled from Whitman's pounding fists, but Darius's hands never left the folio. In that contrast lay the truth. Rage was noise, but power was patience. And as the seconds bled on, the balance began to shift. Not enough for anyone to notice out loud, but enough for them to feel, in the prickling on their skin, in the way their voices echoed hollow against a man who had not said a word. The silence had stretched too long, taut as wire. Then, almost imperceptibly, someone moved. At the far end of the room, Ethan Reyes, the junior analyst, youngest in the building by a decade, shifted his phone beneath the table. His thumb hovered over the camera app. He wasn't supposed to. He wasn't even supposed to look up. But something in Darius's stillness felt wrong to ignore, like history happening in a room that wanted no witnesses. He glanced at the glass wall, where a reflection betrayed his hesitation. One officer at the door caught the flicker of motion. Their eyes met. The officer didn't stop him. He just looked away, jaw tight. Whitman was still circling like a hawk, voice slicing the air. "You're nothing but a liability dressed in neon. We cannot waste this company's resources on theatrics." His hand swept across the table, nearly toppling a water glass. A low cough came from the left. Not Whitman, not the vice chair. From someone unexpected, Samantha Lee, an executive assistant seated off to the side, her hands folded around a notepad. She wasn't supposed to speak. She was supposed to observe, record, and vanish. But her voice slipped out, quiet but clear. "Sir, he hasn't even presented his full proposal yet." Every head turned. Whitman froze, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" Samantha's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "You've asked for proof, but you're not letting him speak. That isn't procedure." The room crackled. Even the woman in green stopped tapping her pen. For the first time since the confrontation began, the tide of silence wasn't Darius's alone. It was shared. Whitman's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Procedure? Don't lecture me on procedure. You're here to take notes, not give opinions." Samantha's hands trembled, but she didn't drop her gaze. "I take notes every day, and I know when something doesn't read right." The words didn't roar. They didn't have to. They landed because they came from the least expected corner, from someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Ethan swallowed hard, his thumb finally pressing record. The faint red glow of the camera lit under the table, invisible to most but heavy in meaning. For the first time, there was proof not just of what was said, but of who stayed silent while it was said. Darius turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Samantha's eyes. No nod, no smile, just recognition, quiet and steady, as if to say, "You're not alone in this room." Whitman, red-faced, slammed the table again. "This is insubordination at every level. Security, remove him. And if necessary, remove anyone who sides with him." But the officers didn't move. One shifted his stance, his jaw set tighter, but his boots stayed rooted to the floor. The air shifted again. What began as one man's stillness was now spreading into the hesitation of a guard, into the quiet defiance of an assistant, into the recorded glow on a junior analyst's phone. And in that fragile moment, power began to slip not with a bang, but with a whisper. The boardroom had stopped breathing. For a second, all that lingered was the echo of Whitman's demand security. Remove him, but no footsteps followed. The guard stayed rooted, eyes fixed on the man in blue who refused to move. That hesitation was gasoline, and the spark came from the vice chair. Arthur Langston, 61, vice chair of the board, adjusted his purple tie with fingers too precise, like he was about to sign a verdict rather than participate in a meeting. His voice slid through the tension, calm but laced with poison. "Enough," he said. "This farce has gone on long enough. Mr. Cole, you've mistaken your presence here for permission. Let me be clear, you have neither." A hush. Even Whitman paused, his fury momentarily silenced by the precision of Langston's strike. Arthur continued, his gaze narrowing like a blade. "Your so-called proposal insults the intelligence of this board. Reinvestment in neighborhoods, redistribution of assets, these are fantasies of outsiders, not strategies for a corporation of this scale." He leaned back, his chair creaking under the weight of his disdain. "Frankly, your attire should have warned us. You come here dressed like a circus banner, expecting respect. Respect is earned, not purchased." Gasps slipped from the corners of the table. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, but none intervened. The words hung heavy, unchallenged, legitimized by silence. Samantha's notepad trembled in her hands. Ethan's camera caught every syllable, every sneer. His chest tightened. He had never heard contempt voiced so openly, so raw, within these walls. Whitman smirked, emboldened by Langston's declaration. There at Island, at least someone had the courage to say it. The woman in green chimed in, her voice brittle. "Arthur's right. We can't allow sentimentality to steer us off course. Mr. Cole, it's best you step down before we're forced to take further action." Step down. Forced action. Each phrase was a hammer, pounding against the patience that had settled like steel in Darius's chest. And yet he still didn't rise. He folded his hands, thumb brushing the edge of the folio, and met Arthur's stare. His silence was not retreat, it was pressure. It forced the vice chair's words to echo longer, hang heavier, reveal their own ugliness in the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. Arthur mistook it for weakness. "You think silence gives you power?" His laugh was hollow. "It gives you nothing. You are nothing." Those words, spoken by the second most powerful man in the company, split the air like a verdict. Ethan's grip tightened on his phone. Samantha's pen dropped against the table with a sharp clink. Even one of the guards shifted, boots scraping against tile. Because everyone knew lines had just been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The boardroom wasn't simply hostile anymore, it was combustible. And sitting in the center, Darius Cole remained still. The eye of a storm no one else realized was already breaking. The tension in the boardroom had thickened to the point of suffocation. Even the hum of the projector felt louder, as though the machine itself was recording judgment. Arthur Langston's words still hung in the air. "You are nothing," when Whitman struck again, this time not with his mouth but with his hands. He lunged forward, fingers snatching the slim folio that lay in front of Darius. The leather creaked under his grip, pages sliding free as he yanked it open. "This," Whitman spat, waving the documents like a prop in a trial. "This garbage is what you think qualifies as vision?" No one moved. No one stopped him. He tore through the first page with deliberate violence, the rip echoing louder than his insults. He ripped again, and again, each sound shredding not just paper but the last pretense of civility. The woman in green gasped softly. Ethan's phone shook in his hand as the camera captured every jagged tear. Samantha's knuckles whitened around her notepad, breath trapped in her throat. Whitman let the shredded sheets fall onto the polished oak, their edges curling like wounded skin. Then, with one final flourish, he crumpled the folio cover itself and tossed it to the floor at Darius's feet. "Garbage," he hissed, "and so is the man who brought it." He turned sharply toward the guards by the door, his face flushed crimson. Enough wasting our time. Remove him. Now. The officers shifted. One adjusted his belt, the other moved a half-step forward. The sound of leather and steel, the snap of holsters, the groan of boots cut through the silence like a threat made physical. Arthur leaned back, satisfied, his tie glinting under the light as though the insult had been sealed with ceremony. The man in orange chuckled under his breath. Finally, for a moment, it seemed the command would be carried out. One officer's hand hovered near Darius's shoulder, ready to grip, to drag, to erase. But then Darius looked up. He hadn't spoken for minutes. He hadn't moved as his work was ripped apart, as his dignity was tested. But now, his eyes lifted, slow and unblinking, locking onto the guards. The officer froze. It wasn't defiance that held him. It wasn't even threat. It was gravity, the weight of a man who refused to be erased, who sat like stone while others crumbled under their own noise. Whitman slammed the table again, desperate to regain momentum. "Do you hear me? He has no authority here. He's a fraud in a stolen suit." His words bounced back at him, hollow against the walls, because the real spectacle wasn't the shouting or the torn paper littering the floor. It was the man in blue, still seated, still silent, radiating a patience that made everyone else in the room seem frantic, small. And though they didn't know it yet, the board had just crossed into a place they couldn't return from. The insult was no longer verbal. It was physical, public, irrevocable, and soon it would be answered. The shredded pages still clung to the oak table, a paper graveyard of ideas dismissed without reading. Whitman stood above them, chest heaving, convinced he had won. But the man he had tried to erase had not moved an inch. Darius sat straighter, hands resting briefly on his knees before reaching into his jacket pocket. The gesture was calm, deliberate, no rush, no panic, just certainty. From the lining, he drew a sleek black phone. Its screen lit up, cold blue against the sterile light of the boardroom. "Protocol 7, he said quietly, but the room heard him. The single phrase cut sharper than Whitman's shouts. Heads turned, pens stilled. The guards at the door exchanged a glance. Darius pressed one button. A tone chimed, and then a voice steady, professional answered instantly, "Yes, Mr. Cole." Nia Thompson, his executive assistant. Her voice carried through the speaker, clear as if she were sitting at the table with him. "Confirm board session active," Darius instructed. "Confirmed. Recording initiated. Live verification underway. Cross. Referencing attendance logs with ownership registry now." Arthur Langston's composure cracked. His chair squealed as he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Darius didn't look at him. He spoke into the phone as if Arthur's question was background noise. "Also, flag incident markers," Darius continued. "Time. Stamp the words fraud, garbage, removal order. Cross. Check with security feed." "Yes, Mr. Cole." Logged and secured. The junior analyst, Ethan, nearly dropped his phone as he realized the call wasn't theater. It was infrastructure. A system was unfolding in real time, one that dwarfed Whitman's theatrics. Whitman slammed his palm flat on the table. "Turn that off! You have no right to document internal proceedings." Darius finally looked up, his eyes steady, voice low but lethal. "Everything spoken here today will be reviewed. Every insult, every order, every attempt to erase me." The boardroom stilled. Samantha's notepad lay forgotten, her gaze fixed on the man in blue. One of the guards took a slow step back, boots scuffing the tile, as if distance might spare him from what was coming. Arthur sneered, though his voice wavered. "You presume too much authority." Darius tilted his head, almost curious. "Do I?" Nia's voice returned, sharp as glass. "Ownership verification complete. Mr. Cole, your controlling stake is confirmed. 40, 2% voting power. Chair authorization locked." The words landed like a gavel. Whitman's face drained. Arthur's lips parted, but no sound followed. The woman in green stopped tapping her pen. It lay flat against the table, forgotten. Darius placed the phone on the table, speaker still live, its glow illuminating the shredded remains of his proposal. He folded his hands again, his patience unbroken, and spoke the first full sentence since the storm began. "You tore up my work. Now watch as I tear up yours." The silence that followed was no longer his weapon. It was their prison. The boardroom had gone still, frozen mid-breath. The only sound was the faint hiss of the speakerphone. Nia's voice still active on the line. "Ownership verification complete. Mr. Cole, controlling stake confirmed. Chair authorization locked. The words lingered, almost surreal. Some members blinked as though they hadn't heard right. Others stared at the shredded papers littering the table, suddenly aware of the enormity of what had just been torn. Whitman's mouth opened, but no words came. His face flushed deeper, a grotesque shade of crimson. Arthur Langston tried to salvage the moment. He leaned forward, voice dripping with forced calm. This is absurd. You can't possibly expect us to believe. But Darius rose to his feet. The chair scraped back slowly, its sound grinding across the marble floor like a verdict. He hadn't stood all morning. And in that simple motion upright, steady, eyes sweeping the table, the balance of the room shifted. He picked up the torn folio from the floor, laid it back on the table, and spoke not loudly, but with a resonance that made the air itself tighten. You called me a fraud. His eyes locked on Whitman. In a boardroom I own. The words dropped like iron. You tore up my proposal. His gaze shifted to Arthur. But you forgot one thing. I don't answer to this board. This board answers to me. Gasps scattered around the table. Samantha's pen rolled off the surface, clattering against the floor. Ethan's phone trembled in his hands, his camera catching the exact moment the room fractured. Whitman's voice cracked as he tried to bark authority back into existence. Impossible! This can't be true! Darius tilted his head, eyes steady, the faintest shadow of a smile on his lips. Then explain why every one of your votes requires my signature. The guards at the door exchanged another look. They weren't sure what stunned them more, the words themselves, or the fact that the two most powerful men in the company suddenly looked powerless. Arthur's jaw clenched. Even if you hold shares, that does not make you. Nia's voice cut in, clear through the speaker. Mr. Cole is not only the majority shareholder, he is the appointed chairman of this corporation, ratified last fiscal quarter, all records available upon request. The room collapsed into murmurs. The woman in green pressed a trembling hand to her necklace. The man in orange finally set his phone down, his smirk gone. Darius leaned forward, placing both palms flat on the oak table that moments ago had been slammed in his face. I gave each of you a chance to show integrity, he said, every syllable sharp. Instead, you revealed who you really are, and now you will see who I really am. The silence after wasn't empty. It was charged, like the seconds before a storm breaks. Because the reveal was complete. The man they tried to erase was the one holding the eraser all along. For a long second, no one moved. The boardroom hung in silence so sharp it cut. Then the unraveling began. The woman in green was first. Her pen slipped from her fingers and clattered against the table. She reached for her necklace, clutching it like a lifeline, eyes darting anywhere but toward Darius. Her earlier certainty evaporated into trembling denial. The man in orange swore under his breath. He shoved his phone into his jacket pocket, as if hiding the smirk he'd worn only minutes ago could erase it from memory. His shoulders hunched, the swagger gone, replaced by something smaller, fear maybe, or shame. Arthur Langston's mask cracked next. His jaw clenched hard, but the rhythm of his fingers against the armrest betrayed him. He'd never lost control in a meeting before. Never. And yet here he was, stripped bare by a man he'd dismissed as an interloper. His eyes flicked to the guards, then back to Darius, calculating, desperate for an exit that didn't exist. Whitman, loudest of them all, was suddenly silent. His chest still heaved, but no words came. The crimson of his face drained to a sickly pallor. He stood rooted, one hand flat against the oak table as though he needed it to remain upright. The shredded pages at his feet looked like evidence against him, damning in their simplicity. Across the room, Samantha's notepad slid from her lap. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she stood slowly, her eyes fixed on Darius, with something closer to awe than fear. She had spoken when no one else dared. Now she was vindicated. And Ethan, quiet Ethan, no longer hid his phone. He lifted it openly, camera steady, capturing every detail. The red record light glowed like a warning flare. He whispered into the mic, almost reverent, This is the chairman." The guards exchanged another uneasy glance. Their orders had been clear minutes ago, remove him. Now the man they were meant to drag out was the one who signed their paychecks. One shifted his weight, stepping back toward the door. The other adjusted his cap, his gaze firmly on the ground. Neither spoke, neither dared. Around the table, chairs creaked as executives leaned back, away from the center, as though distance could insulate them from accountability. But there was no safe distance. The room was too small, the truth too large. Then, one by one, phones appeared. Not just Ethan's, but others, some trembling in board members' hands, some clutched by assistants standing along the wall. Screens lit the room like a constellation, each one a lens, each one a witness. The boardroom had transformed into a courtroom, and Darius was no longer on trial. He stood taller, the storm that had been brewing in silence now settled in his eyes, calm, unshakable, absolute. Every insult, every dismissal, every shred of paper was still on the table, but the weight had shifted. No one dared to speak. No one dared to breathe too loud. Because they all knew history was no longer unfolding quietly behind closed doors. It was being recorded, broadcast, immortalized, and every second of their collapse was now part of the record. The constellation of glowing phones lit the boardroom like a jury box. No gavel struck, but everyone felt the verdict approaching. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried the weight of finality. "Nia," he said evenly, his eyes never leaving Whitman. "Yes, Mr. Cole," her voice answered instantly through the speaker. "Terminate Gregory Whitman. Effective immediately. Revoke all access privileges." Whitman's head snapped up, disbelief twisting into rage. "You can't," but the sound of his badge buzzing red cut him off. A sharp electronic denial. He swiped it once against the reader embedded in the conference wall. Red. Again. Red. The silence that followed was brutal. His authority, once thunderous, now reduced to the flat beep of rejection. Gasps broke around the table. The woman in green covered her mouth. Ethan's camera caught the exact moment Whitman's face collapsed. Rage dissolving into something closer to terror. Darius turned, his gaze slicing toward Arthur. "And Arthur Langston, vice chair, effective immediately suspended pending audit. Strip his credentials." Arthur jolted upright. "This is outrageous. I have decades." His protest was drowned by the identical buzz. Red. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a system alert flashing across the screen. Ascesis, revoked. He stared at it, lips parting soundlessly, as though the device had betrayed him. Darius didn't pause. Extend suspension to all who sided with their actions. Flag their votes null until further review. "Yes, Mr. Cole," Nia replied. "Processing now." One by one, members glanced down at their devices. The man in orange cursed under his breath as his tablet locked him out. The woman in green fumbled with her badge, shaking it against the table reader, each denial beep sounding like a heartbeat running out of time. Panic spread, quiet but unmistakable. The power they'd assumed eternal had been severed in seconds, undone not by shouting but by a voice calm enough to unmake careers. Samantha stood straighter, her chest rising with the weight of vindication. Ethan whispered into his mic, "It's happening. He's firing them in real time." Whitman slammed his dead badge against the table, the thud hollow. "This isn't legal. You'll regret this." Darius finally shifted his gaze, calm, unwavering. "I don't regret enforcing accountability. You mistook tenure for immunity. That mistake ends today." The words cut deeper than any shout. Security officers, who only minutes ago had been ordered to remove him, now stepped forward toward Whitman and Langston. Their hesitation was gone. The system had spoken, and with it, the hierarchy flipped. The two men paled, realizing the command had changed hands forever. And in that moment, the entire boardroom knew. This wasn't just punishment. It was precedent. The boardroom was unrecognizable now. Moments ago, it had been a theater of mockery and dismissal. Now, it was a courtroom stripped bare, the guilty exposed under the glow of screens still recording. Whitman stood frozen, badge useless in his trembling hand. Arthur Langston sat stiff, his phone dark, his lifeline to power severed. The woman in green stared down at the table, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. The man in orange muttered curses, but they sounded smaller now, crushed under the weight of what had been revealed. Samantha exhaled, slow and steady, her shoulders finally lowering as though she had been carrying years of silence herself. Ethan's camera lens was steady, red light glowing like a witness sworn under oath, and in the center of it all stood Darius Cole, calm, unbroken, radiating the kind of power that didn't need volume, didn't need theatrics, just truth. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward slightly, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "You tore my work. You called me a fraud. You tried to erase me from a boardroom I built. He let the words hang, each one heavy, undeniable. And now you've seen the truth. I don't need to shout. I don't need to beg. Because I am not the product of your approval. I am the result of your underestimation. A hush fell even deeper. He straightened, adjusting the lapel of his electric blue suit, eyes sweeping the table one final time. You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake. Phones captured it. Samantha breathed it in like oxygen. Ethan whispered it softly into his mic, as though engraving it into memory. The guards stepped closer to Whitman and Arthur, ready to escort them out not by order of rage, but by order of justice. Darius turned toward the door, his footsteps unhurried, each one echoing against marble like a drumbeat. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because the message was already carved into the air, impossible to erase. In this room, power had been redefined. It wasn't in volume. It wasn't in arrogance. It was in patience, in dignity, in the unshakable truth that justice didn't need to scream. As the door swung shut behind him, the boardroom remained silent, not with control, but with the weight of consequence. And for everyone watching inside the room, behind their phones, across the glow of countless screens, the lesson was clear. You can deny a man respect. You can deny him entry. But you cannot deny the truth when he owns the very ground you stand on.